On a wind-swept cliff above the Atlantic, a bride and groom began their married life not with champagne, but with the echo of waves battering the rocks below. The house they inherited was weathered and gray, its timbers groaning like an old soldier's bones. Yet it was not the sea that unsettled them. It was the dog. Valor, the German shepherd left by Daniel's grandfather, would sit for hours before the stone hearth, his amber eyes fixed, his body tense. One night in the driving rain, he began to claw at the cold granite, frantic, relentless, as if trying to tear a secret from the earth itself. The groom dismissed it, but the bride felt her heart tighten. What could a dog see? What could he hear that two newlyweds could not? The answer, hidden in stone and silence, would unravel the meaning of their vows and change everything. The coastal city wore late winter like a punishment handed down without appeal. The sky was a slab of pewter pressing on slate rooftops. Sleet combed the harbor into ribs of gray, and the air carried salt, rust, and the metallic sting of cold that snapped conversations into staccato bursts. Along the esplanade, gulls pinwheeled like scraps of torn parchment, their cries whipped flat by the gale. On the headland stood St. Brigid's, a Romanesque church whose buttresses had survived a century of storms. Its stones were the black of wet bread, its stained glass saints quivered in their leaded frames, and the bell tolled like an anchor line dropped through weather into the sea's heart. Guests arrived with collars raised, laughter steaming from lips before dissolving in the cold, and the nave welcomed them with the mingled scents of beeswax, pine boughs, damp wool, and the faint smoke of candles fighting the draught. Emma Collins stepped down from a Navy sedan and turned her face into the stinging sleet, not flinching. She was 26, willow slender, her posture more resilience than ornament, her copper-brown hair drawn into a low chignon, pinned with pearls that caught the stormlight. Her complexion carried the winter's fairness, but her cheeks were warmed with life. Her ash-green eyes were steady, eyes that listened all the way to silence before she spoke. Her dress chose grace over spectacle, lace sleeves mapping her arms, satin falling in a clean line to the flagstones, her train a pale answer to the black sky, and beneath the hem peaked black leather ankle boots polished for endurance, the practical choice of a woman who valued standing her ground over stumbling in glass slippers. Beside her, Daniel Hayes turned from the narthex with a stillness that seemed to part the wind. He was 30, his body lean and solid, his jaw marked by a pale scar that curved like punctuation from a training accident he never bothered to dramatize. His hair, clipped short, bore silver threads at the temples, and his cropped beard framed a mouth inclined more to quiet strength than easy laughter. His eyes, gray-blue, held the discipline of a soldier accustomed to watching without being watched, scanning exits even when standing in peace. His shoulders squared as though braced not against the weather, but against whatever blow might come. And though he carried the calm of someone schooled in survival, there was in the set of his hands a gentleness, as if he knew that strength meant nothing without mercy. He bent to kiss the backs of Emma's gloved hands, and the smile she gave him lit the bleak afternoon more surely than the stormlights lining the road. Inside, Father Seamus Malone waited with a ritual book balanced in his narrow hands. He was spindle-thin, parchment-skinned, his hair as white as sea foam combed carefully over a narrow skull. His eyes smoke-colored with the wisdom of someone who had married 3 generations in that church, and buried nearly as many. His voice, though softened by age, carried the resilience of a shepherd who had learned that blessing was less about words than about weathering storms beside his flock. Near the first pew sat Attorney Howard Morton of Morton and Pike, 60 years old, lantern-jawed, wearing a charcoal suit pressed into sharp lines. His tortoiseshell glasses rode low on his nose, and his hair, still dark at the crown, was salted at the edges. He had the look of a man who had inhaled the scent of parchment and lemon polish for decades, his face folded by time into neat creases of patience. Morton's presence was a silent contract. He never dramatized, but nothing he carried was trivial. Behind him, angled for attention without seeming to demand it, lounged Victor Hayes, 27, Daniel's cousin. Victor was soft-handsome, his complexion flushed with the ease of wealth, his brown eyes gleaming before his mouth chose to smile. His hair was swept back with too much pomade, and his steel-blue tailored suit hugged a frame that had grown soft from indulgence. He smelled faintly of amber cologne, expensive and insistent, and his posture suggested a man who believed both furniture and people should accommodate him without resistance. The ceremony unfolded with solemn beauty. Emma's vow, steady despite the tremor of joy, carried like a string across the nave. Daniel's "I do" landed with the weight of a promise hammered on an anvil. Father Malone raised his trembling hands in blessing, and outside, the sleet softened into snow as if the weather itself bent briefly to grace. In the parish hall after, strung with white lights and pine garlands, the air smelled of chowder, smoked fish, and fresh bread. Laughter filled the room, glasses clinked, and cousins darted between tables with napkins. Then Attorney Morton rose. He tapped his glass once, not for ceremony but for procedure, and the room cooled by a degree. His baritone, sanded smooth by decades of reading clauses, filled the air. He unfolded a document sealed in red wax, stamped with the emblem of a ship's wheel. "The last will and testament of Mr. Benedict Hayes," he intoned. Daniel's jaw did not harden, but his silence deepened. Emma slipped her hand into the crook of his arm, grounding him. Morton read carefully. Victor Hayes was named heir to the controlling shares of Hayes Maritime Logistics, the family company, as well as the great residences, accounts, and jewels. The list went on like a tide rolling treasures out of reach, each word tightening the smile on Victor's face. Aunts and uncles murmured, some with approval, others with envy, most with a complacent certainty that the wealthy world had once again confirmed its own shape. Then Morton cleared his throat, his voice lowering, and the room leaned in. "To my grandson Daniel Hayes, I bequeath the property known as Stormwatch Ledge, together with its house in whatever condition it stands, my German shepherd dog named Valor, and the entirety of the logs, journals, and papers stored therein. Stormwatch is given to the one who understands the value of a silent watch." For a heartbeat, silence held the room like a dropped anchor. Then it broke into ripples, whispers, frowns, even muffled laughter. Stormwatch Ledge was a jagged tooth of rock battered by the Atlantic, its house a weathered husk that groaned with every gale. It was a burden disguised as a gift. Daniel, the groom, the soldier, was being left with isolation, a crumbling house, and a dog. Victor leaned forward, his smile sharpened by triumph. "A rock and a dog, cousin," he said, his voice pitched low but carrying. "Seems fitting. Some men inherit empires, others inherit poetry." Daniel said nothing, though the scar at his jaw seemed whiter in the hall's light. Emma's grip tightened on his arm. She looked up at him with ash-green eyes that held no doubt. "If the world abandons us," she whispered, "then it abandons us together." Her words were soft enough for him alone, but their strength echoed against the derisive laughter scattered around them. Father Malone approached, laying a hand on each of their shoulders, his touch light but steady. His smoke-colored eyes glimmered with quiet compassion. "Storms are weather, not verdicts," he said, his words an anchor against humiliation. Victor's laugh, thin and metallic, followed them as they stepped into the vestibule. He stood framed in the doorway, his profile etched by candlelight, his mouth curled into a smile that was neither joy nor kindness, but something seedier, something planted to sprout later. Outside, snow fell in hard, bright needles, stinging cheeks and coats. Yet Emma lifted Daniel's scarf and knotted it with precise tenderness. He tucked a stray curl behind her ear. They stood together against the weather, against the world's judgment. Beyond the headland, Stormwatch Ledge took another blow from the Atlantic and endured, its house leaning into the gale, its windows black. Inside that house, unseen, a German shepherd sat by a cold hearth, amber eyes fixed forward, waiting as though for a command that had yet to be spoken. The road north unraveled beneath Daniel's worn pickup, a rattling machine that coughed in the cold, but carried them faithfully past bare-limbed forests and fields, folded into white silence. The farther they drove, the smaller the towns became. Clapboard houses leaned against each other for shelter, general stores lit with a single yellow bulb, fishermen moving like shadows bent against the wind. The world grew sharper, lonelier, until at last they reached the fishing hamlet of Port Clyde, where the ocean made every word salt and every roof tremble under its breath. The harbor was a small half-moon carved out of rock, filled with boats tied like beasts waiting in their stalls, their masts creaking in chorus with the wind. Emma drew her coat tighter around her slender frame. She was not weak, but the sea's breath here was relentless, colder and more invasive than the city storms she had known. Her copper-brown hair, loosed from the chignon of the wedding, whipped into her eyes as she looked out at the horizon. She carried herself with quiet determination, her ash-green eyes tracing each line of the harbor as though memorizing a map she might later need for survival. Daniel stepped beside her, his boots crunching on the frost-bitten boards of the pier, his jaw set, his blue-gray eyes narrowed against the brine. He was steady, though beneath his silence a tension flickered like an ember kept alive by wind. Then from the end of the pier, beneath the orange glow of a single bulb, a man raised his head. Jedediah. Jed Carver was old the way driftwood is old, etched, hollowed, and hardened by time, but not broken. His shoulders were broad, though slightly stooped, wrapped in a wool sweater stained by fish oil and salt. His face was a cartographer's map of deep lines and scars, each furrow carved by years on the water. His nose bent to the left from some long-ago brawl or accident, his beard short, bristled, salt-white, and his eyes startlingly pale blue, like ice that had seen centuries. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of gravel dragged across stone, deliberate and slow. "You must be Hayes," he said, regarding Daniel without smile or frown, simply a measure. Daniel extended his hand. Jed's grip was dry, strong, brief. "I was paid to feed the dog till you came," Jed added. "Did my duty. He's waited. But mark me, son. That house holds more than wood and nails. It keeps secrets heavier than any storm." His words hung like ropes in the mist. Then, with a short nod, he turned back to his nets, his hands moving with the instinctive rhythm of a man married to tides more than clocks. Guided by Morton's directions, Daniel and Emma loaded their sparse belongings onto the small motorboat Jed had readied. The vessel was battered but reliable, painted a blue so faded it was nearly gray. As they pushed off, the sea closed around them like a cold hand. Emma sat wrapped in her coat, staring into the fog, her lips pressed together, in determination, while Daniel steered with the competence of someone who understood that steady hands mattered more than speed. 20 minutes later, the dark tooth of Stormwatch rose from the ocean, jagged and defiant, its cliffs black with wet granite, its crown crowned by the skeleton of a house that looked one breath away from collapse. The closer they came, the louder the sea roared, as though warning them back. Daniel cut the motor and let the boat drift into a small inlet marked on the map. The hull scraped stone. He secured the rope, then climbed onto the slick rocks, offering Emma his hand. She took it without hesitation, her boots slipping but her grip unshakable. Together they climbed the path carved in jagged switchbacks up to the house. Stormwatch revealed itself as a weather-beaten cabin of timber gone gray from years of salt air. Shingles were missing, shutters hung on a single hinge, and the porch sagged like tired shoulders. The front door groaned when Daniel pushed it open, spilling a breath of stale air heavy with dust and old seawater. Inside, the walls were paneled in cedar, but the wood was swollen with moisture. Salt crust clung to the window frames, every surface covered in a thin veil of grime. Furniture huddled in corners under sheets, stiff with dust. Emma stepped carefully across the warped floorboards, her delicate figure framed against the bleak room like a stubborn candle against darkness. Her ash-green eyes studied the space not with despair, but with the practicality of someone already calculating where to sweep, where to mend, where to plant something that might bloom. She brushed dust from a cracked table, her fingertips leaving clean trails. Daniel, meanwhile, set their bags down heavily and stood with arms folded, scanning the room as though it were an ambush site. Every creak of the house seemed louder to him, every groan of the wind through the cracks an echo of something waiting. Then, from the corner near the hearth, a shape stirred. Emma caught her breath as a massive German shepherd stepped into the faint light. He was 5 years old, broad-shouldered, his coat a striking pattern of silver gray and snow white, like storm foam frozen mid-motion. His ears stood tall, his posture regal, yet there was no wag of tail, no bark. Only his amber eyes, glowing with a watchful intelligence, fixed on Daniel. For a long moment neither man nor dog moved. Daniel slowly crouched, lowering himself so that his broad shoulders and scar-lined face were less a challenge. "Valor," he murmured, his voice low. The dog tilted his head, nostrils flaring, then padded forward with deliberate grace. He sniffed Daniel's outstretched hand, those amber eyes never leaving his, then pressed his nose gently against his palm. The connection was immediate, profound, like the recognition between two soldiers at the same post. Emma exhaled, her lips curving into the faintest smile as she crouched too. Valor turned toward her, sniffed, and after a long pause, leaned his weight slightly against her leg, as if acknowledging her part in this new watch. That night, the three of them settled in with only the moan of the wind and the pounding sea as lullabies. Daniel patched the fireplace until it grudgingly accepted flame, its light painting the room with fragile warmth. Emma unrolled blankets, shook dust from pillows, humming softly as she worked, her voice trembling but resolute. Valor lay near the door, a sentinel refusing sleep, his gaze fixed outward, ears twitching at every gust. In the days that followed, Stormwatch began to teach its lessons. The house creaked and shifted like a ship at harbor. The sound of waves battering the cliffs became constant, invasive, rattling even Daniel's disciplined calm. At night, he would wake drenched in sweat, memories of desert patrols overlapping with the unending boom of the ocean. Emma found him once on the porch at dawn, shoulders hunched, face gray in the pale light. She touched his arm. He did not flinch, but his eyes were haunted. "It's the sea," he whispered. "It doesn't let me sleep." Emma, though chilled and weary herself, answered with a small act of defiance. She cleared a strip of ground beside the broken porch, dug with her bare hands until the soil yielded, and planted bulbs she had carried in a paper bag from the city. Tulips, daffodils, fragile promises of spring. "Then let's make something the sea can't drown," she said, her hands stained with earth. Daniel watched her, silent, but something in his chest eased. Valor remained their constant. The dog patrolled the perimeter each morning, his paws silent on the rocks, his amber eyes scanning the horizon. He stood at the cliff edge with the composure of a statue, wind tearing at his fur, utterly immovable. When Daniel hammered nails into the sagging porch, Valor lay nearby, head on paws, gaze steady, as if ensuring each strike of the hammer was permitted. When Emma knelt to water her small row of bulbs, Valor positioned himself at her back, guarding her against an ocean no one else could command. One evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, Daniel and Emma shared a bowl of fish stew cooked from Jed's gift of dried cod. The old fisherman had visited earlier that day, bringing supplies in a small dinghy. His weather-beaten face had softened when he saw Valor alive and loyal. "Good dog," he muttered, scratching the shepherd's neck with rough fingers. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "This house, this ledge, it's not empty. Secrets lie deeper than the stone. Best you mind them." His pale eyes fixed on Daniel for a moment longer. Then he turned back to his boat without waiting for thanks. Emma, her hands clasped around the chipped ceramic bowl, whispered, "Do you believe him?" Daniel's gaze drifted to the darkening horizon where the sea boiled against the cliffs. He did not answer, but Valor lifted his head, ears pricking as though he already knew the truth. Stormwatch was more than a house, and their lives had been drafted into a vigil neither of them yet understood. Stormwatch groaned like an old vessel settling on its keel as the days wore on, its timbers whispering in the wind, its windows rattling to the rhythm of the sea. Emma, ever curious, spent hours dusting forgotten corners of the house, her slender frame bending over trunks and shelves that smelled of mildew and brine. Her copper-brown hair often slipped loose from its knot, catching light from the lantern as if flame had woven itself into her strands. Her hands, delicate yet capable, lifted each object with the quiet reverence of someone who knew that even decay could carry meaning. One afternoon, while Daniel worked outside patching shingles with hammer and rope, Emma pulled back a warped rug in the parlor and discovered a trap door flush with the floorboards. Its hinges resisted with a screech, then yielded, revealing a narrow crawl space heavy with dust and the faint scent of cedar long sealed. Inside lay a weathered wooden chest bound in iron, its surface scarred by time. She called Daniel in, and together they dragged it into the firelight. The lock was simple, rusted, yielding quickly to Daniel's steady hand. The lid creaked open to reveal journals stacked like bricks of faded memory, their leather covers brittle, edges salted white. Emma lifted the topmost volume. On its first page, in ink that had browned to the shade of dried leaves, Benedict Hayes had written, "Stormwatch Log, the music of the sea." The entries were meticulous. Page after page described the rhythms of waves, the pitch of wind through fissures in the cliffs, the harmonics that stones produced under pressure of tide. But more than observation, the old man spoke as though the ocean itself composed symphonies that only those who listened without distraction could hear. "The sea is not noise," one passage read. "It is an orchestra. Men call it chaos because they lack the patience to hear the pattern." Emma's ash-green eyes widened as she read aloud, her voice soft, lyrical against the drone of the storm outside. Daniel stood beside her, his broad shoulders casting shadows against the wall, his scar-jawed face taut with something between skepticism and reluctant wonder. "He spent years writing this," Emma whispered. "This wasn't madness. This was Research. Daniel frowned, folding his arms. Or obsession. Yet even he could not deny the precision of the notes, diagrams of waveforms, sketches of rocks that seemed tuned like instruments. That evening, as they pored over more volumes, the storm outside intensified, sleet striking the shutters like rifle fire. The sound bled into Daniel's bones, and suddenly he was no longer in Stormwatch, but back in the desert, sand scorching his skin, the air shredded by gunfire. His breath came hard, shallow. He staggered from the table, knocking over a stool, his gray-blue eyes wide, pupils contracted as if searching for targets in the dark. Emma rushed to him, but he flinched at her touch, lost in memory. His fists, clenched, body coiled like a man braced for impact. Then Valor moved. The shepherd rose from his vigil at the door and padded silently across the room. His coat, silver and white, shimmered in the firelight, his amber eyes calm and unwavering. He pressed his broad head against Daniel's shaking hand, grounding him with weight and warmth. Daniel's breathing faltered, caught, then slowed, the tremor in his shoulders easing as if the dog had absorbed part of the storm himself. Emma knelt beside them, her slender hand on Daniel's arm, while Valor stayed firm, immovable, his presence a barrier against ghosts. Minutes passed before Daniel's gaze cleared, the scar along his jaw relaxing as he came back to the present. He exhaled a long breath, rough but steady. "I'm here," he murmured, his voice gravel deepened by shame and gratitude. Emma brushed damp hair from his forehead, her eyes fierce with compassion. "You don't have to fight alone." Valor leaned closer, and for the first time, Daniel wrapped both arms around the dog's neck, pulling him close as if acknowledging a comrade in arms. Later, calmer, Daniel returned to the journals. His voice, steadier now, read passages aloud. Benedict had recorded not only sounds but effects, strange vibrations that seemed to ease pain, memories that rose and fell with certain patterns, nights when the house itself hummed as though tuned by invisible hands. "This isn't just a house," Emma said, her ash-green eyes alight. "This is a laboratory, a legacy." Daniel studied her face, the determination carved into her slender features. He had thought of Stormwatch as exile, but Emma saw it as inheritance. And perhaps in the pages that smelled of brine and ink, there was more truth than banishment. Over the next days, they catalogued the volumes, arranging them in order. Some were weather-stained, pages blurred, others contained meticulous notations, even attempts to capture rhythm in musical bars. Emma translated the language into her own notes, her handwriting precise and neat. Daniel, though less enchanted, marked locations on old maps, comparing sketches of cliffs to the terrain outside. Valor never left their side, padding from one to the other, his ears twitching as though he too heard music beyond human reach. One evening, Emma lifted a smaller book from the bottom of the chest. Its cover was softer, more worn, the corners rounded from being carried often. Inside were not logs, but reflections, personal entries Benedict had never intended for business ledgers. In one, he described walking the cliffs with a young Daniel, teaching him to listen for the undertone beneath the roar. In another, he wrote of regret that his family only measured value in cargo and coin, not in the resonance of stone and tide. Perhaps only one who has stood still in both silence and battle will understand. The entry ended. Emma closed the book slowly, her green eyes shining in the lantern light. "He meant you," she whispered. Daniel looked away, jaw tightening, haunted again. But he did not dismiss the words. Instead, he turned back to the map spread across the table, tracing his finger along the cliffs. "If he left secrets here," he said, voice low, "then they're meant to be found, and they're not for Victor. Outside, the storm relented into a quiet drizzle, the sea sighing against the rocks as though listening. Inside, the fire burned steady, the journals lay open like doors, and in the center sat 3 figures bound by more than inheritance. A woman who saw promise in ruins, a man wrestling ghosts, and a dog whose silent loyalty was louder than any vow. The storm came like a siege, battering Stormwatch until the house shook on its foundations. Rain slashed sideways against the windows, thunder rolled across the black Atlantic, and lightning clawed the sky with white fire. Inside, the cabin was dim despite the hearth fire. Shadows jumped across the warped beams as Emma moved about, slender and tireless, her copper-brown hair damp from sealing cracks with cloth. Her ash-green eyes flickered between worry and resolve. She worked quietly, but each glance toward Daniel betrayed her awareness that storms unsettled him more than he admitted. Daniel sat stiff-backed near the fire, gray-blue eyes staring into flame as though trying to impose order on its chaos. His scarred jaw was clenched tight, every muscle carrying the tension of a man who had once waited out ambushes in desert heat. His broad shoulders hunched against the thunder, yet he gave no complaint, only silence. Valor lay stretched across the hearthrug, his coat of storm gray and white bristling at every rumble. Normally silent, the German shepherd lifted his head now, ears pricked, amber eyes fixed on the floor itself. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not directed at wind or rain but at something nearer. Then, without warning, he surged forward, claws raking against the flagstones before the hearth. His nails screeched on stone as he dug with frantic insistence. Emma gasped, clutching her skirt, while Daniel rose instantly, his soldier's reflex snapping into readiness. "What is it, boy?" he demanded, though the shepherd gave no glance, only dug harder, whining low as though pleading. The sound was desperate, unlike anything Valor had made before. Emma knelt beside the dog, her delicate fingers brushing dust from the grooves he exposed. "He's found something," she said, her voice taut with awe. Daniel dropped to one knee, running calloused hands over the stone floor. At first he felt only cold, slick granite, but then his fingers found the faintest seam, a rectangle cut with precision. "Hidden slab," he muttered. The storm outside boomed as though in confirmation. Together with iron poker and crowbar, they pried at the edges. The stone resisted, as though reluctant to surrender its secret. Rain hammered the roof in rhythm with their effort until, with a grinding scrape, the slab lifted. Beneath yawned a narrow cavity lined in lead. The smell of oil and age rushed out. Valor nosed eagerly at the opening, tail rigid, ears alert. Daniel lowered his lantern into the hollow. Light revealed a metal box, small but sturdy, its seams sealed with wax long hardened. He hauled it up, setting it on the table with a heavy thud. Emma's breath caught. Her slender hands hovered over the box before retreating, as though afraid of what it might contain. Daniel cut through the wax with a soldier's knife. The lid opened, and inside lay another journal, wrapped in oiled cloth, alongside a key of brass. The key was beautiful, heavier than expected, its surface etched with intricate patterns, spirals, waves, and symbols reminiscent of tides or currents. Emma lifted it gingerly, her pale skin contrasting with the gleam of the brass. "This is no ordinary key," she whispered. "It feels ceremonial." Daniel unwrapped the journal. The leather was dark, supple despite its age, and the handwriting inside unmistakably Benedict's. Yet these words were different from the earlier logs. They carried secrecy, urgency, as though he had written for only one reader. Stormwatch is not only a house. Beneath the cliffs, we built chambers to hear the ocean's true voice, instruments tuned to currents and stone, a listening post, hidden from those who value profit over truth. They will call me mad, but the ocean sings. It sings warnings, patterns, perhaps even memory. One day someone will hear what I have heard. Emma's voice trembled as she read aloud. A listening station? Under the sea? Her ash-green eyes darted to Daniel, wide with both wonder and fear. Daniel's scarred face hardened, not with disbelief, but with calculation. He traced the symbols in the margin, schematics of chambers carved into rock, diagrams of rods sunk into seabed. He had known his grandfather as eccentric, but never as builder of secret laboratories. The thunder shook the walls, and Emma shivered. She closed the book gently, hugging her arms against her slender body. If anyone else discovers this, Victor, the company, anyone, they'll come for it. They won't let us keep it. Daniel stared at the brass key, then at Valor, who sat erect now, tail curled tight, amber eyes never leaving the secret they had uncovered. Grandfather trusted us with it, Daniel said, his voice steady but edged with steel. That means we guard it. Whatever this station is, it stays ours until we understand it. Emma moved close, her lace-sleeved arms wrapping around his. She pressed her forehead briefly against his shoulder. If this gets out, they'll destroy us, she whispered. Lightning lit the room, and for a heartbeat, the three figures, soldier, bride, and dog, were illuminated against the storm like guardians of an ancient secret. Valor lowered his head to Daniel's knee, silent but resolute, as though he too had taken the vow. Outside, waves hammered Stormwatch, trying to drown its secrets. Inside, the brass key gleamed, waiting to unlock the ocean's voice. The storm of the previous night had left the world scrubbed raw, the air sharp as steel, the rocks glistening with a sheen of salt and dew. Morning light broke through ragged clouds, casting silver across the Atlantic, and the tide had drawn back as though the sea itself conspired with them. Daniel stood on the headland, the brass key heavy in his hand, his gray-blue eyes scanning the jagged shoreline. His scar, pale against stubble, seemed more pronounced in the morning light, and his expression was one of measured determination, the look of a man preparing for a mission he had not chosen but could not refuse. Beside him, Emma wrapped her wool cloak tight, her copper-brown hair whipped loose by the wind. Her ash-green eyes, clear yet trembling at the edges, studied every rock as if each might yield its secret. She was slender, graceful in her movements even on the slippery stone, her pale skin flushed with cold. Despite the fatigue lining her face, she radiated resolve, as if the secret beneath the cliffs demanded courage no less than love. Valor trotted ahead, his silver and white coat gleaming damp from sea spray, his tail high, ears pricked. His amber eyes were alert, scanning not only the horizon but the ground beneath. When he reached a moss-covered wall of stone at the base of the cliff, he stopped, stiffened, and barked, the sound echoing across the hollow shore. Daniel and Emma hurried to him, their boots sliding on the algae-slick rock. The wall was sheer, veined with cracks and streaked with ancient green moss, barnacles clinging like forgotten runes. To ordinary eyes it was no different from other cliffs, but Valor pressed his nose to a narrow seam where two boulders met, whining softly, then barking again with urgency. Daniel crouched, running his rough hands along the seam. He felt cold stone, then, there, a shallow depression, round and metallic at its heart. He drew the brass key from his coat, its ornate spirals catching a shard of sunlight. For a moment he hesitated, the soldier in him instinctively mistrusting doors in places where no doors should exist. Emma's hand found his arm, her fingers slender but steady. "If your grandfather built this, then he meant for you to see it," she said softly. Her voice, thin in the wind, carried a conviction that settled his doubt. Daniel fitted the key into the depression. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a lock turning somewhere deep within the earth, the seam widened. The ground trembled faintly beneath their boots. Slowly, impossibly, the stone face shifted, grinding aside as though pulled by hidden gears. Moss tore, barnacles snapped, and a gap opened into the cliff, exhaling a breath of cold air from darkness untouched by sun. Valor barked once, sharp and triumphant, then trotted in without fear. Daniel raised his lantern, its small flame struggling against the draft, and followed with Emma close behind. The tunnel sloped downward, hewn into the living rock, its walls smooth as though shaped by both hand and tide. Water dripped steadily from fissures, the sound forming a rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat. They descended in silence, their breaths misting in the lantern light, until the tunnel widened into a chamber unlike anything they expected. The walls were lined with steel and glass, incongruous against the raw stone. Consoles long silent sat beneath a vast panoramic window of reinforced crystal that faced the ocean's depths. A bank of dormant monitors flickered suddenly to life, powered by systems that had slumbered but not died. Blue light bathed the chamber, casting their faces into ghostly relief. Daniel's breath caught. Emma's ash-green eyes widened, reflecting the glow as if she were standing in a cathedral of another world. Valor padded forward, nose lifted, ears twitching at sounds only he could hear. Then the monitors resolved into images and waves of sound. On one screen, sonograms pulsed with the voices of whales, long keening notes that curved across the graphs like brushstrokes. Another displayed staccato clicks of dolphins, sharp and precise, dancing in intricate patterns. Yet another showed the constant drone of distant cargo ships, their mechanical thrum layered like a bass beneath the symphony. And deeper still, graphs surged with low vibrations that made Emma's chest tighten. The seismic murmurs of the Earth's crust, tectonic whispers rising from miles below. The chamber was alive with music, but not of human making. Emma pressed a hand to her lips, tears shining in her eyes. This is more than technology," she whispered. "It's a symphony of the world itself, a legacy of an entire life." Daniel placed both hands on the console, his scarred face lit blue, the soldier's tension in him giving way to awe. His grandfather had not built a fortress or a treasure vault. He had built a place to listen. Emma stepped closer to the window. Beyond it, the ocean swayed, shadows of fish moving like drifting constellations. The whale song resonated through the speakers, filling the chamber with sound so deep and ancient that it seemed to vibrate in their very bones. Valor sat at Daniel's feet, ears perked, his amber eyes reflecting the monitors. Even the dog seemed still, reverent, as though he too heard meaning beyond comprehension. For a long moment none of them spoke. The room felt holy, a chapel carved beneath sea and stone. Then Daniel straightened, soldier's practicality returning. "If this exists," he said quietly, "others will want it. Victor, the company, governments maybe. They won't see music, they'll see advantage." Emma turned, her face pale but fierce. "Then we protect it, like your grandfather did, even if it costs everything." Her words echoed in the chamber, mixing with the symphony, binding themselves into the promise that had begun at their wedding altar. Daniel nodded once, solemn as an oath. Outside, the tide began to return, waves thundering against the cliffs. But deep within storm watch, the door had opened, and the sea had begun to sing again. The sea had grown restless long before the storm appeared on the horizon. Daniel sensed it in the way the wind shifted, carrying the metallic tang of rain. He stood outside the weather-beaten cabin of Stormwatch, scanning the gray horizon where dark clouds were gathering like an army preparing to strike. Emma lingered in the doorway, her copper-brown hair tied back against the gale, her ash-green eyes troubled yet steady. Valor prowled at the edge of the cliff, his silver and white coat bristling, ears pricked to the distant hum of an approaching engine. Out on the water, cutting through the steel-gray swells, came a sleek motor yacht, a stark contrast to the rugged isolation of the ledge. Its white hull gleamed with newness, yet its presence was intrusive, arrogant, a wound on the wild seascape. At the bow stood Victor Croft, Daniel's cousin, his face pale from seasickness but twisted with a familiar sneer. Victor was a man in his early 30s, shorter and softer than Daniel, his body padded by indulgence, his hair slicked back with precision that wilted in the sea spray. His green eyes were sharp, filled not with courage but with ambition, the sort of hunger that turned every bond into leverage. Years of scheming in boardrooms had hardened his mouth into a permanent smirk, though beneath it lay the insecurity of one who had never earned respect. With him came two men, figures Daniel recognized only by the kind of company Victor kept. The first was Finn, a wiry man in his late 20s, with sharp, angular features and restless eyes that darted constantly, measuring everything for its value. His hair was dark and slicked with brine, his thin lips pursed as if calculating how much coin he could squeeze from every moment. Greed clung to him like a second skin, the greed of a man who had once been poor and never wanted to taste hunger again. The second was Rook, towering over both Victor and Finn. He was a man built like the very cliff they sought to invade, thick-shouldered, neck like a column, his face weathered into a mask of stone. His black hair was cropped short, streaked with gray, and a jagged scar traced down from his left brow to his jaw, evidence of violence past. He spoke little, his eyes hooded and cold, but when he moved it was with the deliberation of someone accustomed to ending arguments with force. The yacht anchored in the cove, and the three men took a small tender to the slick rocks. Daniel watched them climb, Emma clutching the doorframe, Valor growling low and steady. When Victor reached the top, his expensive shoes slipping in seaweed, he straightened his jacket with a flick, as if he were entering a courtroom, not trespassing on a storm-lashed fortress. "Cousin?" Victor called, his voice falsely warm, carried thin on the rising wind. "Fancy meeting you here? Still playing at Solitude?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" His voice was even, but there was steel beneath it. Victor spread his hands. "Only what is mine. You think grandfather built this place for you? For a washed-up soldier and his little bride? No. He built something valuable, something the world will pay dearly for, and I intend to see it sold." Before Daniel could reply, the wind rose, shrieking around the cliffs, and the first drops of rain struck like cold needles. The storm had arrived faster than expected, a wall of black clouds swallowing the horizon. Waves hurled themselves against the ledge, sending plumes of spray over the rocks. The wooden cabin shuddered under the first violent gusts, one window exploding inward with a crash. Emma cried out and ducked as shards of glass flew. Valor threw back his head and let out a long, piercing howl, the sound raw and haunting, carrying above the storm. It was not mere instinct, but training. An alarm passed down from Daniel's grandfather, a signal that danger was imminent and sanctuary must be sought. Daniel's heart clenched at the recognition. He looked from Emma's frightened face to the intruders, then to the darkening sky. The house would not hold. "Inside now," Daniel barked. He herded Emma through the door, Valor at her side. The structure groaned, timbers bending as if the storm meant to crush it. Victor and his men stumbled in after, unwilling to be left to the mercy of the gale. Finn cursed as another window shattered, spraying the floor with rain and splinters. Rook said nothing, only braced himself against the wall, his huge form steady even as the cabin shook. Emma clutched Daniel's arm, her eyes wide. "The roof won't last." Daniel's mind raced, soldier's instincts calculating options. Then Valor pressed against his leg, whining, glancing toward the hearth. Daniel understood. The way down. The hidden tunnel his grandfather had designed for moments like this. He turned sharply to the others. "Follow me if you want to live." Victor sneered even as the wind tore the words from his lips. "Don't think this storm changes anything. Whatever you're hiding, it belongs to me." Daniel ignored him. With Valor leading, they wrenched open the concealed stone panel and descended into the dark passage beneath the hearth. Rain hammered the cabin above, thunder shook the ledge. The heavy slab groaned shut behind them, sealing out the storm's fury, leaving only the echo of their breath in the narrow corridor. Torches mounted on the wall flared as Daniel struck a match, casting orange light on damp stone. Emma clutched his hand, her face pale but resolute. Victor followed reluctantly, his lip curling as though the very act of walking in his cousin's path offended him. Finn muttered curses under his breath, his eyes darting greedily at every mechanism, every gear in the walls, already imagining what price they might fetch. Rook trudged silently behind, his presence a looming shadow. The tunnel led them down into the hidden chamber. When the monitors flickered awake, the room bathed in the eerie blue glow of the sea's secret music. The sonar displays shimmered, currents painted in color, voices of whales echoing across the screens. For a heartbeat, even Finn fell silent, awed despite himself. Emma touched Daniel's arm, her eyes shimmering with both fear and wonder. "It's alive," she whispered. But the awe was broken by Victor's voice, sharp with envy. He stepped forward, pointing at the screens as if they were his birthright. "This is it. This is what he hid from me. Do you see, Finn? Do you see, Rook? Technology beyond price. With the right buyers, we could own the world." His voice lowered, venom seeping through every word. "This was never meant for a broken soldier and his wife. This is mine." Daniel turned slowly, his scar catching the glow. "You don't understand. This isn't a weapon or a vault of gold. It's a legacy of listening, of guarding. You'll never see that because you only know how to take." Victor's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, a sharp alarm shrieked from the central console. Lines of green text scrolled across the main screen, and the sonar display pulsed with a new signal, dark, compact, deliberate. A submarine, small but unmistakable, moving toward the ledge beneath the cover of the storm. Daniel's stomach turned cold. Only one explanation fit. He swung to face Victor, whose smirk had returned, smug and venomous. "You called them," Daniel said, his voice low with fury. "You told outsiders." Victor's eyes gleamed. "Investors, cousin. People who understand the value of what lies here. They'll pay in fortunes. And you can rot in this hole with your ideals." The chamber filled with the sound of sonar pings, each beat a warning of the danger drawing closer. Emma clutched Daniel's hand tighter. Valor growled deep in his chest, amber eyes fixed on the glowing screen, the reflection of an enemy yet unseen. The storm above raged, but a greater storm was closing in from below. The storm had raged all night, waves hammering the granite spine of Stormwatch, thunder cracking like cannon fire. In the cavern below, Daniel stood at the glowing console, the sonar display alive with frantic colors, his scarred face set in grim focus. Emma clutched his arm, her copper-brown hair damp from the dripping ceiling, ash-green eyes steady, though fear lingered at the edges. Valor sat upright at their feet, his silver and white coat bristling, amber eyes fixed on the shifting patterns of light. Behind them, Victor paced like a caged animal, his pale face twisted by greed and desperation. Finn leaned against the wall, fingers twitching as if counting imaginary coins, while Rook loomed silent, his bulk absorbing the blue glow of the monitors. The submarine's signal pulsed closer, a predatory shadow hidden in the chaos of the sea. Daniel's hands moved swiftly across the controls, pulling from memory codes drilled into him years ago. His grandfather's journals had hinted at protocols, and Daniel's military past had etched naval ciphers deep into his mind. He composed a burst transmission, short and sharp, routed through the hidden array Julian Croft had built into the station. The words appeared on the small green screen. Vulture's nest compromised. Hostile submersible inbound. Request immediate support. Coordinates attached. His finger pressed the key, and the message vanished into the ether. Victor laughed harshly. "Who do you think will come? Do you imagine anyone cares about an old soldier's codes? The world is mine to sell, Daniel, not yours to protect." His words dripped venom, but beneath the sneer was doubt. The storm shook even his arrogance. Minutes bled into an hour, the submarine's icon still circling, testing, waiting. The chamber hummed with tense silence until Valor stiffened, ears pricked, tail rigid. He gave a sharp bark, then another, as if sensing what no screen yet showed. Moments later, the sonar flared. 2 new signals appeared, swift and purposeful, approaching from opposite sides. They carried the signature Daniel recognized instantly: U.S. Navy cutters. Relief surged through him, steadying his breath. On the surface, hidden by sheets of rain, powerful vessels cut through the swells, steel gray against the black sea. Their floodlights pierced the storm as they closed on the intruder. The submarine tried to turn, but the cutters bracketed it with precision honed by decades of patrol. On the console, Daniel watched as the blue icon slowed, faltered, and finally stopped. The hostile presence was pinned, forced to surface. Valor let out a deep woof of satisfaction, his eyes never leaving the display. Emma clasped Daniel's hand, her slender fingers trembling with relief. "They heard you," she whispered. Not long after, the grinding rumble of machinery announced the opening of the stone door above. Rain and salt wind poured down the tunnel, accompanied by the heavy tread of disciplined boots. Daniel stood straighter, instinctively adjusting his stance to that of a soldier reporting to command. Through the shadows emerged Admiral Nathaniel Harris, a man in his late 60s with a frame still broad despite the years, his uniform immaculate even in the storm's wrath. His face was lined, skin weathered by decades at sea, but his eyes, steel gray with flecks of blue, were clear, sharp, and commanding. A neatly trimmed beard streaked with white framed his mouth, and though age had softened the planes of his face, authority radiated from every movement. "Daniel Croft," Harris said, his voice deep, steady, carrying the weight of command. He stepped into the chamber, gaze sweeping over the monitors, then to Victor and his men, whose bravado had evaporated under the Admiral's scrutiny. Julian was right. He said his grandson would call when the world pressed too hard. Victor broke from his silence, his words shrill. "This is mine. I brought investors. He stopped when 2 sailors stepped forward, rifles angled just enough to remind him of his position. Finn muttered curses as his wrists were bound, while Rook submitted in silence, his cold eyes revealing neither regret nor fear. Victor struggled, his once smug face pale with fury, shouting accusations even as irons closed around his wrists. His cries faded as the sailors marched him toward the tunnel, swallowed by the storm above. When quiet returned, Admiral Harris turned to Daniel and Emma. "This place," he said, gesturing to the glowing monitors and steel walls, "is not a weapon, though many would treat it as such. Julian called it the Silent Watch. He believed the sea itself speaks if we are willing to listen. And he believed only someone who understood both the cost of war and the value of silence could protect it." His eyes softened, though the weight of command remained. "He believed that person was you." Daniel swallowed hard. Memories of his grandfather's calloused hands, the gruff voice like rocks in surf, rose unbidden. "I'm no visionary," Daniel said quietly. "Just a man who's seen too much." Emma stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "But you understand. And that's what matters." The Admiral studied her for a moment, then nodded with respect. "You are right. This is not a burden one man can carry alone. Julian told me his grandson would not stand watch without someone at his side. He was right about that, too." He drew a deep breath. "So I will make this official. By order of Naval Intelligence, the guardianship of Stormwatch Station passes to you, Daniel Croft. And to you, Emma Croft. Valor, of course, needs no commission. He already knows his duty." At the sound of his name, Valor rose, tail wagging once, then stood tall beside Daniel and Emma, a sentinel carved of fur and loyalty. His amber eyes gleamed, as if recognizing the oath being spoken. Daniel bowed his head, the weight of the moment pressing on him like armor, yet also lifting something heavy from his shoulders. "We'll keep the watch," he said simply. The Admiral clasped Daniel's shoulder, then Emma's hand, his grip firm with trust. "Then Julian's legacy is safe." With that, he turned and strode back toward the storm, his sailors following with the prisoners. When silence returned, Daniel, Emma, and Valor climbed the tunnel and emerged onto the cliff. The storm was breaking. Shafts of pale sun pierced the ragged clouds, painting the sea with light like molten silver. The ruined cabin lay in splinters below, swept away by the gale, but the three of them stood together, anchored by something stronger than wood or stone. Emma's hair blew wild in the salt wind as she reached for Daniel's hand. He clasped it, their fingers interlacing, steady in the aftermath. Valor stood beside them, his coat damp, ears erect, chest broad as he faced the horizon. He looked every inch the warrior his bloodline promised. But more than that, he looked like family. Daniel glanced at Emma, her eyes bright despite exhaustion. "It was never about the fortune," he said. She smiled faintly. "It never is. It's about what we choose to guard, and who we choose to guard it with." Together they turned toward the endless Atlantic, the sea rolling in its eternal song, the silent watch continuing as it always had, yet now with new guardians bound not by wealth, but by love and purpose. Sometimes the storms of life come when we least expect them, shaking our homes, our families, even our faith. But just as Daniel, Emma, and their loyal dog Valor discovered, God never abandons us in the darkness. He places miracles in the smallest signs. A dog's howl, a hidden path, a light that shines in the storm. What seems like loss can become purpose. What feels like betrayal can be turned into redemption. In our daily lives, we too face storms, moments of loneliness, disappointment, or fear. Yet the Lord whispers through them all, "Be still and know that I am God." If we hold on to faith, to love, and to each other, no storm can sweep us away. So, dear friends, if this story touched your heart, share it with others who may need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel to join our growing family of faith and inspiration, and may the blessings of the Lord protect you and your loved ones. May God's light guide you through every storm, and may His miracles surround you always. May God bless every viewer watching right now.